Hi, this is Young-Seo Kim, professor of New Testament and Early Christianity at Virginia Union University. Today I'm going to talk about biblical interpretation, especially when we get in front of the text. Biblical texts do not speak or mean, but we mean with them. Every interpretation is presupposed, and no reading is neutral. Our task is not to make a perfect or complete meaning, but to engage with them. By the way, there's no such a meaning that's everlasting or fixed or going forever. So we need to know who we are as readers, what we read in the text, and how we read it. So when we talk about meaning in front of the text, we must be aware of all these three elements, which are reader, reading lens, and the text. I wrote this view of interpretation in my book, Biblical Interpretation, Theory, Process, and Criteria, back in 2013. With this in mind, we can read the biblical texts focused on liberation or social transformation. For example, we can read the Exodus story as a model of liberation for the oppressed. So much of this kind of reading goes well with Jesus' teaching and ministry for the marginalized and oppressed. Black theology or liberation theology in general worldwide goes on this direction. But how can we read another story in the Bible, that is Joshua's conquest narrative of Canaanites? The question is, how come Israelites could become oppressors? Do all Canaanites and animals, other things, deserve death? There were obviously some innocent people, children or babies. Is the God of liberation merely a tribal God for Jews only? Should we read that narrative that way? Compare this narrative with what Paul says in his letter. Paul's understanding that God is the God of Jews and the God of Gentiles also. He said clearly in Romans chapter 3:29. God is the God of Jews and the God of Gentiles also. He changed his view of God. He was a Pharisee and he held the view that the Jewish God is for them only. The God is the God of Jews. But all of a sudden he changed his view. Now he confesses in his letter, God is the God of Jews and the God of Gentiles also. That's a remarkable revolutionary change. In other words, the true God is more than what the Bible says. So here is the role of the real reader, which is so important. The real reader must engage with the various texts responsibly and take a stand. Let me say again, here is the role of the real reader, flesh and blood, who must engage with the various texts responsibly and take a stand. Let me talk about another text, which comes from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 15, verses 21-28. In this story, Jesus forcefully denies the Canaanite woman's request for her daughter's healing, not one time, but 3 times, with the Jew first mission or Jewish exclusivism. You know that story. It's hard to hear him saying or denying the woman's request. He said, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Wait a minute, what did he say? I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. In other words, I'm not for you. I don't have time for you. I don't care about you. He also said it's not fair to throw children's food to the dogs. What? Wait a minute. To the dogs? Such a derogatory saying is permitted? He's just saying it is simply wrong or ethically problematic, even though he finally allows for her request because of her faith. But he represents a perspective of imperialism or triumphalism. It's wrong. At the end of the story, he reverses his view and praises her faith. This story is not merely about the woman's great faith. Many people read that way, focusing on the woman's great faith. But even when we talk about the woman's great faith, we still need to explain in what sense her faith is great. This story is not merely about the woman's great faith, which needs explaining, but about the narrow vision of the mission of Jesus and his disciples. But about what? The narrow vision of the mission of Jesus and his disciples. The readers, you and I, must investigate the historical context of Matthew's Gospel and the historical Jesus' time in his ministry. We must see the power dynamics in the story, conflicting ideology, and matters of race, gender, class, economics, religion, and culture. By the way, all people in this story need transformation, including Jesus in this story. All characters and people in this story need a sort of transformation. The typical reading focuses on the woman's submissive faith, which often condones injustices and evil acts. That is not justice for me. We need to stand on God's side, not having God by your side. Sometimes people are confused. They don't have God by their side, but they never think that they must stand on God's side. We must read Paul's radical politics as he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 27-29. He says, "But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, things that are not, to abolish things that are, so that no one might boast in the presence of God." Wow. In the end, liberation movement or social transformation must address all kinds of marginalization, locally and globally, economically and socially, religiously and politically, personally and communally, psychologically and spiritually. Readers of texts, we must be aware of a multilayered, intersectionally-woven marginality and stand in front of the text and take a stand. That's my view of a biblical interpretation, how we can testify to the gospel or truth of God. Thank you for listening. This is Dr. Kim speaking to the world. Thank you.